Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies, Sieps. My name is Göran von Sydow, and I'm the director of this institute, and I'm very glad to welcome you to this seminar that we're hosting today on the European Green Deal, Challenges in the East. Now, Sieps, we strive to act as a link between academia and analysis and the world of policymakers. We do that by tackling topics and issues that are high on the political agenda and that also have a profound impact on the way in which European cooperation works. It is now almost 2 years since the new Commission took office, and when they did so, they also increased the level of ambition when it comes to fighting climate change. The Commission has produced overarching theme, which is called the Green Deal, but also a number of instruments and new policy proposals that are aimed at reducing emissions and also making Europe a greener continent. But European Union consists of 27 member states, and any political platform or program of this sort need to work for the whole of Europe. We know that member states have different challenges, different points of departure. So how can we make this work for the entire Union is the question that we will discuss here today. Now, I will only introduce this seminar in this very short words. We have an excellent panel. We have a new publication, which is just out, that will be presented at this seminar today. And the whole exercise will be guided by Mats Engström. Mats is senior advisor here at Sieps, and he has a long experience working in this field. So I'm very happy now to hand over to you, Mats, to guide us through this exercise.
Thank you very much, Göran, and thank you all viewing this webinar. We are only 11 days from the climate conference in Glasgow, the meeting of the Climate Convention, and we are only 1 day away from a European Council meeting where both the Glasgow meeting and the energy prices are on the agenda. So as Göran said, we at Sieps, we studied European integration matters in general and the role of climate and energy policies as part of this. And we, of course, see the Green Deal and the subsequent proposals and discussions as a very important part of this, as well as the response to the economic crisis through the emphasis on the twin transitions of green and digital transformations. But there are also voices of concern about the effects of these proposals and developments in different parts of the European Union, about costs, about how benefits will be distributed. And this is also now very evident in the debate on the energy prices. So it is very timely, and we are very happy that Julian Popov has written this report for us, which is now available on the Sieps website, www.sieps.se, but also that we will now be able to hear him present this report and also having it commented on by two excellent speakers, Péter Kaderják from Hungary and Jytte Guteland of the European Parliament. I will introduce them more later. But first I will give the floor to Mr. Popov to present his analysis and conclusions. And Julian Popov is a fellow of the European Climate Foundation. He is an influential opinion leader on energy and climate policies in Europe for a long time, and a former Minister for Environment and Water in Bulgaria. So, Mr. Popov, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I would like first to thank Sieps for the opportunity to write this paper, to present my views, and to you personally, Mats, and all your colleagues who helped a lot. And so it's an interesting moment. And when I finished the paper, I finished it roughly when the energy price crisis started. And there was big question mark in my head, and I guess not only in my head, but we discussed it a little bit, whether substantial changes should not be made. And I was thinking about that. I mean, now the energy prices are going through the roof, and everybody in Europe, and it's not only in Europe, is facing serious challenges with the rising and not subsiding energy prices. And the question was, well, should I change seriously the paper and my views? And thinking about that, I thought, I don't know whether I'm right, but I thought that there is there wasn't a reason for this, because what the crisis with the energy prices is showing is in a way similar to the risks that Central and Eastern Europe are facing with the Green Deal. And the risk, if I have to kind of define it very briefly and roughly, is that we're not always prepared to face and to mitigate systemic risks. And we get enthusiastic and excited about single technology or about single solution. And very often we jump to long-term conclusions on the basis of something that we see at the moment. And we are trying to get some small but kind of loud political gain without thinking very much about consequences. And I think this is what is happening now with the energy prices. We could have done much more to mitigate the effect of them and even to reduce them or keep them under some sensible control. Even the situation is absolutely extraordinary, and it's a perfect storm around the world. It's not something to do with Europe. But we have similar issue with Central and Eastern Europe. Central and Eastern Europe is a strange part of Europe. It came in later with huge enthusiasm and gradually started building confidence, but also together with this confidence, East European countries started also developing some resentment about European policies. And this resentment is not always logical, it's not always rational, it's quite often it is irrational, populistic, very often powered by social media, which is amplifying everything that is liked by more people. And so the instant liking phenomenon. And as a result of that, we face quite a lot of issues with the way we deal with the Green Deal. So the first one is the general understanding of the Green Deal. I'm just coming back I was in Bulgaria for a few days. I'm in London now. And there was a big opinion poll about the Green Deal. And roughly over 70% of people support the Green Deal and support climate action. But 80% don't know what the Green Deal is. So it's a massive discrepancy between support for the general direction and lack of knowledge of how this general direction will be implemented. And as a result of that, a lot of political and lobbyist views are powering ahead very, very strongly. And I will give you examples so that I'm not so kind of abstract on that. We always focused on energy when we talk about the Green Deal. The Green Deal obviously is something much more than energy. But the first thing that the many East European leaders said when the coronavirus started was that, well, we have to scrap the Green Deal. It will be very expensive. The first thing when the energy prices started going up was we have to scrap the Green Deal because it's very expensive. The fact that the Green Deal is not properly enacted is not part of the conversation. There is very kind of wide popular view that the Green Deal already has massive impact on everything. But the Green Deal is something that will have a proper impact once Fit for 55 legislative package is passed and start operating. So blaming the Green Deal for anything is a little bit misguided. One area which I find quite worrying is, and that's probably the essence of my thoughts and my paper, is that the Green Deal is pushing certain type of modernization of the economy. But this modernization could happen in two ways. One way is just by conventional steps going through the steps of more advanced countries. A specific example is gas. Very often in East European countries, you will hear the statement, well, West European countries have developed their gas system. So we have to do that, and then we can move forward. Very often, this notion of gas as a transitional fuel is seen in a very, very strong way, and including that's a view supported in Brussels, supported by industry. But it is wrong, because the way coal is replaced by other fuels is very different. We don't replace coal with gas. We replace coal with a little bit of gas and many, many other things. Renewables, energy efficiency, but also system transformation. And the system transformation is very, very often kind of missing from our view. And when we, even now in the directions that are accepted and promoted by the Commission, we see that the Commission would accept replacement of coal by gas as long as the gas power is not more than the closed coal power. So if you close 1 gigawatt of coal, Brussels will accept that you would build 1 gigawatt of gas generation. Well, this is actively promoting gas against the trend of transition, because usually, even without specific policy push, when you close 1 gigawatt of coal, you will see that it is replaced by probably 500 megawatt of gas. And this is usually based on higher utilization of existing facilities. So pushing that replacement 1-to-1 is just wrong, but it's easy. It's politically easy because there is a very strong pressure from Central and East European countries that we have to build gas. And what I'm saying is not exactly a speech based on a purely climate argument. It is also very much based on technology and economic argument, because what we're facing now is a very serious risk that trusting gas and gas infrastructure and gas generation will enter and push the whole Central and Eastern Europe into massive expansion of gas generation and gas heating at the moment when the whole trend is exactly in the opposite direction. And why do we see this? Well, there are several underlying reasons. And few of them are not directly linked to the Green Deal, and I find them most worrying. One of them is the very low level of financing and also corresponding development of research and development in Central and Eastern Europe. Most of the countries, I'm not saying that all the countries are the same. I mean, and I have to admit that in many of these things, Bulgaria scores very, very low. Some other countries, like Slovenia, for instance, to score high on some of these ratings. But the very low level of R&D in Central and Eastern Europe, on one hand, is dragging the whole European Union R&D level, funding level down, but also puts Central and Eastern Europe in a distinct disadvantage in innovation, because innovation is driven by research and development, and not necessarily cutting edge research and development. But even if you want to adopt new technologies, which are already developed somewhere, you need this R&D capacity in the country. So Europe as a whole is failing on R&D funding intensity, which is at 2 level of GDP, was supposed to be at 3. That was the plan in for 2020. It was supposed to be there, but it's not. The other related issue with the innovation rate is also education. Education funding generally is much lower, again, in most countries, not in all of them. So the combination between lower funding for innovation and lower funding for R&D, lower funding for education creates very, very kind of a cocktail of breaks of development and innovation, which in turn leads to resistance and resentment in many East European countries, but also leads to a very negative demographic effect, because people who are more ambitious, who want to realize themselves in innovation areas and research and development, they just move out of the region. They move to other countries. So, and this is the case now for quite a long time. If we look at the PISA results for education levels and quality, we will see that in the last 20 years, things are not changing much. And that also means that in the last 20 years, there's not very reliable data on education quality from before that. But these 20 years have generated quite a lot of a significant part of the population which is undereducated and also have been exposed to lower level of national innovation and research debate. When I mention that to somebody, I'm very often confronted with statements like, that's absolute rubbish. East Europeans are very educated. East Europeans are great. They're great minds, and maths is at a very high level, and engineering is at a very high level. Well, what I'm talking about is the statistical general level. Yes, there are many clever people. There are very interesting startups. There are very interesting companies. There are very interesting breakthroughs. But when we compare, the picture is not that promising. And because of this piling up of people who are undereducated, we have this 20 years now generated a whole generation of people who need to be upskilled and trained and educated after their leaving school and even universities. But what happened if we look at the statistics? Most of the East European countries have very low participation in continuing education, in retraining, in lifelong learning. I mean, the whole engagement with learning after leaving school, after leaving university. And this now is connecting with not just the need to move evolutionary towards meeting the standards of Western Europe. This is clashing and mixing with the sudden need that is the essence of the Green Deal to transform rapidly. So at the moment when when Europe is making the push for rapid industrial transformation, innovation, digitalization, new industries, new technologies, at the moment when knowledge and innovation and research and development have to be on much, much higher level than in a usual sort of evolutionary gradual path, Eastern Europe is staying at the same level, and the gap between the East and West is starting to widen. And the reason for that is that quite naturally and absolutely normally, the high-level innovation paths are going to centers where innovation and research and development is developed. High-level and high added value industries are going there where you have workforce which is highly qualified and with all the research background and PhDs background and everything. And that's not the East, that's the West. So at the moment when we as Europe as a whole have to very fast move forward and perform at a very, very high speed, naturally we resort to already developed centers. And this is fully justified. I'm not criticizing for a second the fact that research funding could go to Sweden or Germany or France or Denmark, simply because research funding is not social funding. I mean, you can't put it where there are gaps and lows. You put it where this funding can perform at its highest and highest quality. So this is my general kind of vision and concern. And just a couple of words.
Maybe you would have to come back to that in the discussion, right, if it's okay, Julian, because I know the next speaker has some time limitations. So I will get back to you on that. Thank you very much. That was a very good start of the discussion, I think. And now I would like a first intervention from Jytte Guteland, who is a member of the European Parliament and who is also was the climate rapporteur of the climate law, and who is also now the shadow rapporteur for the proposal for the emission trading system scheme, ETS. Ms. Guteland, what would you say about this issue about the Green Deal and possible divisions between the East and West, and how this can be handled in a EU context, please?
Thank you, Mats, and thank you, Sieps, for this interesting and important report. And thank you also, Mr. Popov, for your intervention. I heard part of it because I also took part of plenary here, but what I heard was very valuable. I would like to start by saying we are in a time in the European Union now where we need to step up our action to reach our climate objectives. And I believe this is not only for the European Union, it's for the globe. And we are in front of Glasgow now with lots of new energy in front of Glasgow, and many important also interventions have been outspoken from US, from the European Union, but we also have new declarations from China and many others in front of Glasgow. So it is really a window of opportunity to see this COP as a game changer, and that this will be the COP where we truly start action after Paris. And when we also conclude on many of the obstacles that we had the last time we met in Madrid on the rule book. But I would also like to see in many ways this as a COP that will deliver not only the conversation, but also the action and the reduction of emissions. All that said, I think for the European Union, we are also in a time where we go from the conclusion of the climate law to more concrete action in the sectorial legislation, when we are now in the phase of regulate the different sector, and not at least the industry and energy sector via the ETS. And all that is done in a time where we also see higher electricity prices, and we have a ongoing debate on how that will influence the debate. And therefore it was interesting to read your report and also read how the situation is in the European Union among our member states, and also from the debate on how it will also maybe impact the West and East situation, and if it would widen the gap or not. And I also think it was really interesting to read about, in particular, the views on how different member states are, and the dependence on coal is really not the same in the different member states. And I think this is something we need to bear in mind, so we don't do this collective assumption that the member states has exactly the same challenges. I also found it interesting to read about the electricity prices in particular, and how it would affect the income groups, and that it is not so easy to say that price would be a very sharp tool to handle energy poverty. But on the contrary, there might be other tools that are more important if you like to handle the energy poverty in Europe. And for me, that was valuable to know, since this is an ongoing debate in the European Parliament right now, how it will affect the society as a whole, and also in particular the lower income group, if we have higher energy prices. All that said, I like to insist in this conversation that there is no turning back for Europe. We need to go on in this transition. We do it for climate, and the reports that we had, the latest from the IPCC, shows that we are more in a hurry than maybe we thought. And it was actually very scary to read the latest report because it goes faster, and we are at this point, we are going towards 3 degrees global heating. And we also see that countries like my own in Sweden, the northern part of Europe, seem to have even a higher, a speedier global heating going on. And there is also many worrying facts from the scientific community that shows how also the sea levels will impact us as human beings. So I'm more convinced than ever that there is no going back. We need to continue this transition. We need to reduce the emissions, and we need to do more in all sectors. But all that said, there is also, of course, very important that we in parallel have a very strong just transition and a social policy toolbox that is relevant and broad, and that it is used both on the EU level but also in the member states. And here I would like to say that I don't think it should be necessary the same tools. We can have climate legislation and we can have climate tools that is not social policy. Like you actually said in your report, it is not, it might not be the same tool that will be efficient to create an equal society that will be efficient to reduce emissions. And we need to do both. We need to use the sharpest tool to reduce emissions, but we also need to use other tools for the just transition. And I think that needs to be very clear in the political conversation, that the climate policy cannot be the only one responsible for this transition to be just. It needs to be, of course, not worsening anything, that it doesn't need to do worse. Of course, we should always have in our mind to do it as just as possible, but it needs to be in combination with a very good toolbox for the social just transition. And that can be the tax systems, it can be the budget system, it can be about security systems, created funds in the member states. It can also be, of course, on the EU level that we have a modernization fund, innovation fund, but also a climate change social fund. So, of course, on the EU level, we can do part of it. But we need to send a very strong message to the member states that they have a job to do here. And this is not only the EU that can deliver. And last but not least, if you ask if the future will be better or worse, more equal or less equal, if it will be more unjust or if it will be more fair, this depends on us. This is not the climate policy in itself. It depends on what society we would like to create as politicians and as a society, and who we vote for. And this is in our hands. It's not a destiny for Europe, and it's not a destiny in this transition whether it will be more unjust or more fair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jytte, and thank you for also highlighting the issue of just transition and the broader scope of political instruments, and also for mentioning some of the issues now in the negotiations on the revised emission trading system that perhaps will be important in this context, such as the use of the enlarged modernization fund, where the money in the innovation fund will be going, and also what will happen with this proposal for the social climate fund. Maybe we will get back to some of these issues. But now I would like to turn to Dr. Péter Kaderják, who is well situated also to comment on these issues. You are now the director of the Zero Carbon Hub at the Budapest University of Technology and Economics, but you have a wide background, including as State Secretary for Climate and Energy in Hungary, and I know you have also been very involved in these issues around innovation and climate. So please, Mr. Kaderják, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mats, and also Sieps for inviting me into this very timely and interesting seminar. Greetings to you, Julian, and congratulations also for the paper that you put together. And of course, it's always a pleasure to read and understand your thoughts on outstanding energy and climate issues of Europe. Now, if you allow me, I would like just to share a few slides where I essentially put together my comments on what Julian put into the paper, and I would really like to cut my comments to provide few which are more general and a little bit goes beyond the scope of the paper of Julian and provides some more general comments on the European Green Deal. And then I would come very quickly to my comments on the paper. So let me start with the so-called out-of-scope comments, so which really a bit more general. As I see, the European Union is essentially, and its member states are in an extreme global race for technological race for post-fossil fuel energy solutions today, including technology and business innovation and related human and natural resources. Climate policy in Europe is, of course, primarily addressing those pressing climate issues that Julie referred to, but at the same time, what we see is a global race for future technologies, post-coal, post-gas, post-oil technologies. Just in the very recent World Energy Outlook report of the IEA, International Energy Agency, indicated that by 2050, the size of green energy industry might far exceed $1 trillion per year, which is the current size of the oil industry today. So in this regard, and not just because of the climate issues, I think really that Europe is in this extreme race for the global global technological. So in this regard, I think that the EU with regard to race for technology related to transition is already a little bit lagging behind. And in this regard, I consider the European Green Deal as a must, really, for Europe to improve its competitiveness. And also, I think the European Green Deal provided an economic development vision for Europe that Europe has been missing for some time. So in Lisbon, the EU said we are for the most competitive region of the world, but there was no real idea or vision on which to build this. And now we have this, and I think this net zero by 2050 vision is a case on which the future growth of Europe can be indeed built on. I fully agree that this document and this direction is to go for climate and economic reasons together for Europe. Now, what I see is a risk with the Green Deal and, of course, the Fit for 55 package, which is essentially the legislative part of that strategy, is that there are certain components of that policy that could perhaps undermine the whole package. So if implementation goes wrong, then the whole political support for transformation could go wrong. And this could really cause a problem for Europe. So I think that's just a warning that there is a huge responsibility now after finding the right vision to get an implementation which will ensure that the transition is smooth, that we avoid supply security crisis in energy, and also avoid unexpected price crises that we currently have around us. These problems with the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package comes with the electricity sector. Look at Germany, closing down nuclear and coal together might create very serious problems and disturbances on the electricity market. We don't have the sufficient means to upgrade our networks fast enough. And renewables integration and the lack of seasonal storage is an issue, I think, with regard to electricity that the package should address. I have a concern about Europe having a very high price, very high CO2 price without a carbon border adjustment. But if you have a carbon border adjustment, you might end up with a very high CO2 price bubble in Europe without cooperation from the outer world. So Europe really could end up with this very high price bubble. And if we go in an inappropriate way for the cross-border adjustment policy, then we can even end up at a global trade war with our most important trading partners. So it's a very sensitive issue to my understanding. So implementation is critical. Now, my message is indeed, in general, that vision with European Green Deal is fine. Implementation should very much focus on keeping supply security and keeping smooth transition and well understand the energy markets. The current energy price shock will, I think, test the political support for the whole energy transition policy. Although I am fully convinced that the price crisis that we are having now is almost 90% a gas market crisis, is not much to do with the climate policy of Europe, but the framing of the issue by certain players is such that if this price crisis would have been in a climate policy crisis, this is not. This is a gas market problem, essentially, what we have today. So a very clear understanding and communication on that could help to promote, I think, climate policy on the right way. Now, let me come now to Julian's thoughts and paper and provide you some comments. I have one general comment, which is on the general approach and the methodology of the paper. Well, I really do think that the race for European cohesion and reducing the gap between East and West is not a bloc issue. So it's not a Central Eastern European issue. It's a country level race. So European member states are competing essentially to get, I would say, wealthier, and at the same time to get at a better position in the race for future technologies. So Poland is not the same as Romania, and Estonia is not as the same as other CE countries. I think that after time analysis on general CEE conversion or disconversion issues is getting a little bit misleading. So I would propose to go country level and look at this issue in more detail. to my understanding and I just looked at, for example, GDP figures for the last real GDP figures development for the last 3 years in Europe. So the gap between West and East is decreasing indeed. So at the development levels, just the pandemic time brought more cohesion across European countries in terms of GDP. And now I think that the Green Deal and the implementation of the Green Deal can also promote more convergence for some more ambitious Central Eastern European countries, and indeed can lead to a widening gap for some others. But it very much depends on the country and on the sector we are talking. So when I was thinking about this paper, it was always in my mind the Olympic Games result table. When you see, if you look at it for the first side, that the US and China won the race because they have the most golden there and the most points. But if you add up, if you aggregate the EU 27, the EU far won the Tokyo Olympic Games. And now I think this could be a case for the race for the global technology in transition. Individual states are running, but if we can put together a policy that creates an EU which is better than the aggregate of the EU member states, then we have a good policy. So I would go deeper. I would go sector-wise analysis. I would go for looking at value chains for batteries, for car making, for solar energy, and then go to conclusions on this issue. So for me, my two more comments. For me, the key is research, development, and innovation. I think this is the area where if we can go the right way, we can get good medals at the end in this race. Now, I have to admit that in my country, the whole European Green Deal sometimes is perceived as a policy that will result in dumping Western developed green technologies into Eastern countries and having green jobs in Western Europe and buyers of the technologies in Eastern Europe. I think we should forget this possibility. We should avoid this possibility and develop European value chains and have green jobs both in West and East for certain areas. So not all the Eastern countries should be good in everything. But we should somehow also specialize and join those innovation chains and industrial value chains where we can contribute most to this technological global race for transitional technologies. Now, my last comments goes to the list of points that Julian listed. So my favorites from your proposals is the transport issue, great analysis, and I very much support the idea of go for green corridors across Europe to go ahead on that area. Core regions transformation is, I think, another of my favorites, and of course the importance of the reform of education and R&D policies is also very high on my favorites list. We don't have time, but I would love to discuss with you natural gas issues. I am much more in favor of that as a transition fuel because we need supply security. Without natural gas, we will lose that, and if we lose that, then the whole transition policy might collapse. That's my fear, I would say. Not to build new big pipelines, but to keep it as a supply. Even coal, if we didn't have coal today in Europe, electricity prices would not be 300 euro per megawatt, but 6 or 7 or 8, or the Russians would do with us whatever they wanted. So coal is a big friend today, I think, attacking the electricity market gas prices that we are discussing. So not only natural gas, but temporarily coal also helps us in this situation. And I would also discuss a little bit your suggestion on taxation and especially price regulation issues. This will, I think, pop up on the discussion on energy prices today, and also on buildings. I'm a little bit more in favor for not always for deep renovation, but that's a separate issue. But I would stop. I'm sorry for running so long. We need time for additional discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaderják. That was very useful intervention, and I know that you have been very involved in some of these innovation issues, like the battery strategy, for example. I think it's very interesting, the differences between different Central and European countries, as you mentioned. Now I'd like to give Julian Popov the opportunity both to respond to what has been said, and if you like to also to add on to your earlier presentations, the point that I unfortunately had to cut you off a little there. So please, Julian.
Thank you, Mats, and thank you very much, both Jytte Guteland and Peter, for very valuable comments, which I will take away, think further. The social dimension indeed is extremely important, but we have to realize also that the recovery plan and the just transition plans and the whole financial package that is now proposed and moved forward is probably the biggest social redistribution of funds in history. I'm not sure whether I'm right, but if it's not the biggest, it's one of the biggest. So we very often see this transition as something that lots of people will suffer, and then they have to be compensated. I don't think it's always like that, because as Peter said, we're facing a big competition, technological competition around the world. And if we don't act fast in developing these technologies, then Europe will be left behind. So these massive funds that are distributed, including the modernization fund and innovation fund, so the smaller things, they have huge social effect by themselves, even if we don't call them always social funds and social and just transition. A couple of things on the I would love, Peter, I'll come to Budapest and we'll have long discussion on all these issues. On the closing gap and the widening of the gap. I mean, my main thesis is that while the GDP gap might be closing and things are improving on the surface, the innovation and the transformation in West European countries seems to be moving, and there is a risk to be moving much faster than in East European countries. And this is most clearly seen probably in transport, where many West European countries are just banning or dumping diesel cars, old cars. The result is that these cars are becoming much cheaper, second-hand cars. They go to Eastern Europe, not only to Eastern Europe, but mostly. And then we see a clear improvement in Eastern Europe, because instead of driving 20 years old Volkswagen Golf, I'm driving 5 years old Volkswagen Golf. And I'm very happy because I improved the air quality, I improved my standards of living, everything is better. Yes, but at the same time, the country of Volkswagen Golf is dumping all internal combustion engines. So while there is a strong progress in Central and Eastern Europe, the rate of acceleration in at least in the leading West European countries is much, much faster. And there is an underlying invisible gap that is widening. And at some point, it could bring bad consequences for economic, but also for the kind of political and social cohesion of Europe, but also confidence in the European project. I very much agree with you in this point about the global technological competition and that Europe is lagging behind. And I think probably the most important thing is from Central and East European point of view is what are the advantages of Central and Eastern Europe that can be used to strengthen the overall European progress. So I've specifically mentioned in the paper that countries in Central and Eastern Europe are very different. I mean, totally agree with. I know there is a big difference between Estonia and Bulgaria. There is a very big difference between Poland and Hungary, by the way. And I'm getting very cross very often when Poland and Hungary are put in one package about everything, and that's unfair. So the point about the huge difference between countries is very valid, and it should be repeated again and again and again. One thing I would like to clarify about the gas. I wouldn't like to be seen as somebody who says, well, we have to get gas out at any price. The problem is how to define the role of gas. Do we define the role of gas as a transitional fuel, which is something that I don't agree, or we define gas as a balancing and fuel of last resort? Not taking out gas first and then thinking, okay, what shall we do now? Not even taking coal out first and then thinking, what shall we do out? But to have a chain of a replacement that will guarantee the security of supply, but also the rate of transition and innovation. And when I say that, for me, gas should be when you say gas is a transitional fuel, that very often in politics, in political planning, means, okay, we'll close this coal power plant and we'll immediately replace it with the newly built gas power plants. And I think that's wrong, because we have to, when we talk about coal, we have to see what are all the technologies, what are all possible scenarios, including scenarios of global price hikes like the one that we see now, including scenarios with broken or confused or problematic gas market. We have to envisage that and think how to solve it. Not to think that we're closing now coal, we're building gas. Then one day we'll close gas, we'll put solar panels. I mean, it doesn't work like that at all. So it's very important to define what exactly is the role of gas and how that could secure both the transition, but also the energy security, the price stability, and everything that we are trying to do. Yes, and I agree also about the buildings and the deep renovation. I'm also a fan of the optimal renovation, but the buildings is an endless debate that I would not enter, because we won't stop there. But I think it would be good if we sort of agree on several ambitious EU projects on transport, green corridors, on the conversion and a rapid modernization of core regions, which gives fantastic opportunity for these regions to be huge driving centers of the new industry. And yes, research and development and education, which is my big kind of worry and pain.
Thank you very much for that, Julian. I'd like to turn to Jytte Guteland, and also because some of these issues are very linked to the emission trading system and the reform of the emission trading system. Buildings were just mentioned. There's a big debate about the extension to buildings and transport, and you mentioned yourself this social climate fund. But I'm also thinking about the innovation issues that have been highlighted here. And if one looks, for example, at the money in the present innovation fund, the large-scale projects there are to a very large extent in Western Europe and much less in Eastern Europe. And Julian Popov said that the research innovation money has to go to the centers of excellence and so. But I was wondering also in the light of the energy price discussion, how do you see the political situation now in dealing with the ETS reform in the parliament, both generally and also if there are any ways to bridge this gap that these two other speakers have talked about?
Thank you again, Mats, and thank you both to Julian and Peter for excellent intervention. And it has been a privilege to listen to it for me, to get knowledge and also the more knowledge about the differences, because in the debate sometimes everything becomes just summed up together and very not complicated. And I think this discussion it will benefit from being a little bit more complicated and also analyzed in the differences that we have in our member states and not so simplified. But all that said, on the ongoing ETS reform, and in particularly the new ETS on the construction and transport sector, the debate here in the parliament is ongoing, and there is I would say two important aspects in the debate. And one is that with this enlargement and this new ETS, it will speed up the transition and the reduction of emissions, and also make sure that it is done in the sectors that now need a speedier road. And I think for the transport sector, it is welcomed that more is done. But there is also lots of questions from many political groups about the social aspects. And we are there again. And now in this debate on how we can do it and make sure that the impact doesn't become very different between different countries, like my own, Sweden or Germany, or Bulgaria, that is one example mentioned. And that is still a very valid discussion and important, even though, as I said in my first intervention, I believe that many of the social aspects can be handled also by other tools. We can use both, of course, the funds that you, Mats, mentioned in a better way to help out. But we can also, in the member state, work with welfare systems and socially just societies. And that must also be the responsibility of our member states. It cannot only be the European Union who is delivering the answers here, but it needs to come also from the member states. And I think from what Julian said on the social consequence and also the COVID package and the rescue package after COVID is also very valid to remember that there is a lot going on to make sure that we get a more socially just future. And the European Union cannot be blamed for everything that is not done in the member states. So this is also something I would like to convey, a message that we need to work also more on a member state level. But all that said, of course, we will discuss this year how we can improve the social fund, how we can improve the modernization fund and use it even further to not have a big gap between East and West. And also, as you mentioned, on the Innovation Fund, it is a bit early to tell, but of course, that will be helpful to develop new infrastructure and new energy projects. And of course, it needs to be fair distributed between member states too. But the will also needs to come from the member states and the interesting projects. So it cannot only be a distribution fund, it is also about innovation. Thank you. Now they want me to go for a speech, but I will very soon be back. Sorry.
Thank you. So now I would like to turn to Dr. Kaderják again. And of course, you're welcome to react to what has been said by the other speakers. But I had two specific questions. One was coming back to this innovation issue. If you could say a word or two regarding how you worked with the Hungarian battery strategy and you're thinking about the value chains and how countries such as Hungary and perhaps other Central European countries can benefit from taking this kind of initiatives. And the other thing that was mentioned by Julian Popov was the transition of cold regions. And I know that Hungary is phasing out a big lignite plant and is using its own money and some, I think, EU money to facilitate this transition. But I was interested in, if you look at the EU instruments to facilitate for regions in transition, is there some scope for improvement there? And this discussion also about an increase of the modernization fund, is that important and how could it come to the best use? So that was not a small order, but I know you're an excellent expert, so please.
Thank you very much, and let me start with Julian's comments and a few reflections on that. To which I fully agree. So it was very nice to have this opportunity to exchange thoughts on some of these issues, especially on transport. Your comments on the potential threats of division on the speed of electrification, for example, of car fleet between West and East, and the resulting potential dumping of second-hand used cars in Eastern Europe. I think it's a delicate question to investigate, and I agree, and I also see, of course, that risk raising. For natural gas, I can fully accept your comment. So let's call it as a fuel of last resort instead of a fuel of for a transitional fuel, because I fully agree that when you close down a coal plant now, it's a big question what to use to replace it, which alternative. And here I see a nice case for technologies that renewable technologies that really become very competitive on market basis. So I talk to many developers now here in Hungary, and they say that let's say 2 years ago they still considered to build gas units because of the flexibility that they can provide is very valuable. But today, PV plus storage prices out that option. So it's just economically is performing better than CCGTs, and I think this is really the good news. So when the economics will already support that vision for what role we should use natural gas, I think that's the good point. And but for a last resort, really to keep supply security at the level that we enjoy today, I think is critical for the success of the whole transition. That was just my point. On social aspects and the pricing issue, maybe we can come back to this, but I would just like to provide one point on that issue. My country has been under an attack to apply retail price regulations still for electricity and gas household consumers. So we have to produce several reports to the European institutions how to argue that we have been running this system in the past and want to run it in the future. Now this problematic price regulatory regime that we have today in Hungary can help, for example, to handle the social problem of the current crisis. Why? Because don't forget that in the last 2 years, we had historic low gas prices globally and also in Europe. So due to the pandemic, decrease in consumption, we were preparing for negative gas prices and how to handle that situation just last year. Now, what we did in Hungary, we have a regulated household gas price still. We did not reduce the gas price, although wholesale prices were low. So the traders could accumulate a lot of money for the bad times. And now this is the bad time. So what we can say today, okay, no problem. Regulated prices can remain where they were set before. And there is nothing to do, at least in the coming year. And we can forecast that this gas market issue will be over in 1 year. So maybe this time we could also reconsider a few issues that seem to be a dogmatic approach, I think, to market liberalization in certain segments. So maybe this current case could open up discussions on those issues. And now on your questions, Mats, very, very briefly, thank you very much for those. Yes, indeed, in Hungary, we just recently passed a new industry strategy to develop the battery industry. You can ask why batteries, I mean, and also we established a new Hungarian Battery Alliance that is in the process of joining the European Battery Alliance with the kind help of some excellent Swedish experts and colleagues assisted us. And now, again, if you look at the World Energy Outlook recent report, you can see that from the transitional technologies, batteries will have the highest market share, at least according to the IEA, in 2040, 2050. If we go ahead with the transition, applications in electromobility and in electricity sector will be as a huge market. It's a fast, rapid growing market. So, but Europe forget about investing into batteries in the last 2 decades. We were supporting fusion and research into fusion, which is still 50 years ahead. And now we are left with almost nothing. The case in Hungary is that some South Asian investors, mostly South Koreans, came to Hungary. And now what we are working on is really look at how those technology leaders could operate in a way in Hungary and in Europe, so that we can essentially jointly build up a value chain in the battery industry in Europe so that we can catch up. But we need those technology leaders, but also the European small and larger enterprises to cooperate. Now, to what extent this is to be successful or not is time will tell, but that's at least the idea, together with the European Battery Alliance. So that's what we are working on now. And the second question on core regions, indeed, we are more lucky, or otherwise I can say that Hungary had done its homework earlier. So we closed our coal mines and coal units much earlier. We have just the last lignite plant to transform into an innovative region in Hungary. And we get generous support from the LIFE fund. There's a very active work to look at if we close down lignite, what alternatives we might have. And it seems that photovoltaics combined with hydrogen, as Julian puts forward in the paper, is in the plan, and also looking at even gas units which are capable to burn hydrogen. Is also an experimental potential that we can look at and apply in that region. But that's a very complex program, and we I think we are very happy with the support of the EU in that regard, and hope we can sort of provide the lessons from this transformation. Indeed, an increase in the modernization fund and the share of its sources from auction revenues is one of the claims from, let's say, CE countries or Eastern member states that in the future could help to promote these innovative projects in this region. So I can just confirm that would be great. Well, the problem with the innovation fund is indeed, as Julian also said, we are weak on that. But nobody else will do the job instead of us. So I think the rest of the problem with having a very low share of Eastern participation in the innovation fund projects is just the problems that Julian indicated, and nobody else, not the EU, will help us in handling it. So if we can't do that, it's a problem, but we should catch up. I think that's the only way to go.
Thank you for that. I believe there are also some proposals on having more focus and perhaps earmark some money in the innovation fund for example, circular economy solutions that might be beneficial for small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, very much money is going, and I understand the reason for that, to renewable energy and steel plants and the big projects. But there has also been those arguing for a kind of earmarking of some part of the innovation fund to more other parts of environmental measures, so to speak. And that brings me to one of my two more questions to Julian, and we are soon getting to the end there as well. But that is really these instruments we were talking about, the Just Transition Fund, the Modernization Fund, the Innovation Fund, the proposal for a Social Climate Fund. If just to be concrete, also you write about this, but if you would advise on some improvements to the current structure regarding these instruments to EU decision makers, what would your most important advice be? To Julian.
Thank you, Mats. My most important advice is that these funds should be conditional. And conditional, not just on kind of surface conditional to say, okay, 37% for climate, okay, we'll spend them on various things, we'll tick the climate box against and everything's fine, and but also on structural serious reforms. And to give an example, so for example, if we, when we talk to R&D, I'm very much in favor of putting more funds in Central and East European countries in R&D, but that should be conditional, not just for on putting similar funds from the respective country, but from changing policies and budget. Because the question of budget funding, so that means continuous and forever, of education, research and development, and innovation needs to be addressed seriously. We can't just rely on EU funding to fill budget gaps. I mean, budget gaps are not allowed to be filled with such funds, but we know how to do it, even if it's not allowed, because you will reduce the funding in the budget for something else, shift funds inside, and then on the surface, you are not filling a budget gap, but in fact, you are addressing imperfection of national budget policies. So the conditionality should go much deeper, and this is not an appeal to be unpleasant and nasty to East European governments. It is to work together to see how to lift the engagement and the budget engagement and funding and policy and reforms in innovation, R&D policies, and education. That would be my main thing. And social funding also, I mean, the best social funding is stimulating investment, and investment in more high-tech fields and areas with higher added value. So that kind of, in my view, should be linked, because the natural view and popular view. I was yesterday 3 hours in conversation with mayors from a co-region. They're saying the European Union, Europe abandoned us. What do you mean abandoned us? I mean, what have you done? European Union is not something that will go around and kind of look after everybody. European Union hasn't done anything. We're waiting and nothing happens. I mean, there should be a pressure for them to be active and then to work on investments. Very often we would see, closing of coal will lead to unemployment. It will not lead to unemployment. Not a single job will be lost. People will move to other places and most likely will go abroad. And they will not lose their jobs. There is a massive shortage of competent people for the economy. But the most likely impact of coal closure is not that people will be unemployed. They would just vanish from these places. It's very important to think how to keep them there with new investments, but not with compensation. The compensation and an absorption attitude towards European funds is a toxic thing.
Thank you very much for that, Julian. And Péter Kaderják, would you like to comment on this conditionality issue that Julian was talking about?
Well, I would of course agree. Please don't make it conditional on rule of law conditions and political conditions. If you do that, and if it is on more on a professional and output-based conditions, then it's fine. Otherwise, there will be voices from Eastern European countries, definitely.
Yes, rule of law is, of course, an important and controversial issue, and some might argue that that is also an important factor for environmental progress, that courts are independent and so on. But that is something we need to discuss at some other occasion, I guess. But I'll give the last word now, because we're getting towards the end, to Jytte Guteland again. And maybe a wider issue. Of course, you're free to comment on all that has been said here, but you touched upon the broad range of politics and not only to look at the effects of climate policy instruments as such. And I'm thinking about a more general question about the public support for the green transition, both in the East and the West. We have the energy price discussion, but we have also rather weak, some would say, political party systems in some parts of Europe. Organizational, the membership of some organizations is going down. And so do you have any thoughts about this just transition in this kind of broader political sense, how to facilitate that?
Thank you. And thank you for giving me the privilege to speak again. I'm very sorry that I had things going on at the same time, because I wanted this so much. It's so valuable to listen to both of you and to this study. So welcome. So I wanted to be here all the time. So I really tried to run in between. And I'm also sorry I'm in this waiting room. So that's why I'm a bit not in a fixed place. So sorry again for that. But Mats, it's very true. I think we need to work in parallel with welfare systems and creating societies that are more equal. And I think we need to do our homework in our different member states, and there might be different challenges in different member states. And we should not have the idea that the climate policy will repair everything that is wrong. Because if we have that idea, we will constantly have obstacles in this transition. And I have experience, not me personally, but from my history in Sweden, I have the experience of learning about a political system that has constantly changed and have not been so afraid to change, because we had security systems for people to be able to take new jobs and be able to change their lives when the society is changing. And the political idea was very strong during the industrialization in Sweden, that we should not defend the old job. We should insist on the new, better jobs, but we should defend the workers to have the opportunity to take new jobs, have the opportunity to walk on the bridge between the old and the new jobs, secure, with economic security systems, with education, with different tools from the society. And that's what's needed in all our member states now. We need to have an awareness that we cannot have a brave transition if people are stuck in old jobs because they are so afraid of moving themselves. So don't demand from the climate policy tools to do that for you, but say that we build our society to have brave people who like to take on a new challenge, who is not afraid to be unemployed, because we have security systems that will help. We have education, and our society is not built on fear of the future. I think that political message needs to be there in all our member states. And I would never try to give you the impression that I understand the differences between our member states completely, or that I had this idea. They are so individual. And I also think I learned from this conversation not to treat the Eastern member states as if they were having similar similarities in everything, but to understand that they are individuals, as is Sweden if you compare to France or Germany for that matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And then, of course, we have great understanding and are thankful that you were able to combine participating in most of this webinar with also speaking in the European Parliament, where the schedule is constantly changing, the time schedules. And so thank you for that. And I have to conclude now also by thanking all the speakers and Julian Popov for writing this excellent report, and Dr. Kaderják for providing all these good comments. And this webinar will soon be available also to look upon afterwards on the Sieps website. And as I said before, Mr. Popov's report is already there and strongly recommended reading. So thank you all for participating, and thank you all for viewing this webinar, and see you again in some other occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mats.